I'm delighted to be joined by David Swift, who is the author of A Left to Itself, Left-Wing Hobbyists and Performance Revolution. So perhaps you kind of start by outlining what the book's about.
Okay, well, my general thesis is that there's been a sort of qualitative change on the left today, right? So, for the past 100 years, there's always been, say, middle-class or well-to-do people who supported trade unions, white people who took part in anti-racism movements, men who supported feminists, and so on. But I think today, most of the left, and by left I mean, say, membership and activists of the Labour Party, in fact, most Labour voters, certainly the most vocal and obnoxious Labour supporters on Twitter and social media, are not only merely overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly middle class, because there's nothing wrong with allyship. But I think that there's been a real qualitative change, right? Because it's not only simple allyship anymore, right? Or people altruistically trying to help other people, which I suppose is a desirable thing. But instead, I think that for a lot of people, they're motivated less by, a sense of efficacy, less by actually trying to get stuff done, and instead more by the taking part itself, right? I mean, an analogy I use is it's similar to maybe support for a football team, yeah? If you support most of the sort of 92 league clubs in England, you're probably never going to win anything. You don't really expect to win much. Yeah, you don't support your team. You don't turn up every other Saturday because you expect to win the Champions League, say, right? However, and for a lot of people in politics today on the left, it's sort of like that. It's about turning up every other week. It's taking part. It's about buying, the club shirt or a Palestinian flag to wrap around your neck or something like that. It's actually the identity and the comradeship and the taking part that counts for them, rather than getting results. But politics isn't like football and shouldn't be like football. It's really important stuff. And actually, if these people cared so much about the groups they say they care for, maybe they might be more concerned with actually trying to change things and doing the things that work, rather than just shouting loudly on the internet. So that's essentially what the book's about, really.
I mean, do you feel that kind of the influx of the hobbyist middle class left has pushed out some of its more traditional working class base, and do you think the party's going to suffer because of that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think there's two things going on here. Firstly, no doubt, right? I mean, for decades now, we've had this sort of class realignment in that more, say, middle-class people are voting Labour, more working-class people are voting Conservative. According to the YouGov exit poll from the last election, it was more or less 50-50 for ABC ones and then C2 Ds and Es. And that's been going on for some time. And there's many, many, many reasons why that's happened, right? Changes in industry, the decline in private sector trade unionism. Also, I think the expansion of higher education. And I think also the sort of the transformation of the locus of radicalization, if you like, from maybe the shop floor, the factory floor back in the 70s to the university seminar room today, which is where most people get radicalized today, right? It's not in the place of work, it's in the university. But there's not necessarily a problem with that. I mean, I happen to think that there is probably, but there's not necessarily a problem, right? So, if the Labour Party can win elections off the back of middle-class votes with seats like, Kensington and Canterbury, and losing forever seats like Mansfield and North East Derbyshire, there's not necessarily a problem, right? Some Labour loyalists would say it's terrible that we are abandoning the people we were created to represent. But I think where it could be a problem is, well, who sticks up for these people then? There's an American historian and author called Thomas Frank, who wrote a brilliant series of books. In many ways, he was one of the people who really predicted Trump, because for years now he's been saying, we need to watch out for the fact that poor Americans are being hijacked by the Republican Party, despite the fact the Republican Party does nothing for them, right? The Republicans are using cultural issues around abortion and, gay marriage and gun control to persuade people in the poorest US states, which used to be very left-wing, like Kansas, for example, which was a very socialist state 100 years ago, which is now exceptionally right-wing because of these cultural issues. And now the people in Kansas vote for tax cuts for billionaires and do it gratefully, So, and I tell you what, by the way, we laugh about this now in the UK and think, that's the American culture wars, right? Well, I could see something like this happening in the UK in a few decades or sooner. So Frank poses the question, what are the implications when the left-wing party in a two-party system is fundamentally concerned less with economic issues, more with cultural issues, when the base of the left-wing party, the US Democrats, is no longer the working class of America, but is instead, college graduates and a mishmash of sort of rainbow coalition. Well, who's going to look out for the working poor? So I think that's a huge question for the UK, because I don't don't want to offend too many sort of Daily Express readers, but I don't think that the Conservative Party is necessarily going to look out for the working poor in the long run, right? Boris Johnson's making all these pledges about spending and so on, but I don't think really he has the interest of the poor at heart. So that's a dilemma. But another thing is, I think we're sometimes a bit too easy to draw this binary between the sort of white working class, if you like, and I don't know, metropolitan elites or whatever. Because let's look at the politics of, say, Black and Asian people. Yeah. Plenty of Black and Asian people are quite conservative with both a small and big C, on, say, family values, say, or indeed sometimes in immigration, like Indian Hindu Britons, or Britons from an Indian Hindu background, I should say, tend to be more skeptical about, say, illegal immigration than white people, actually, and tend to be more in favor of profiling terrorist suspects according to race and stuff, which is a bit bizarre. But also economically, lots of Black and Asian people are quite neoliberal, actually. And it's only the sort of reputation of the Tory party for racism, really, which is keeping a lot of these people in the Labour stable. But even that, you often hear about like people talking about, rolling off the phobias, like, or misogynistic, homophobic, racist, etc., transphobic, and all this, almost as though all these people sort of agree on things, right? But what about, say, what about all the right-wing women? Like from Margaret Thatcher down, right, to the majority of white women who voted for Trump. There were plenty of conservative women. So are they really women? Are they still in this grand coalition? What about all the conservative gay people, the conservative Black and Asian people? What about, frankly, the racist gay people and the racist gay women? The disabled people who are homophobic. So it is actually, I think for me, the big binary in British and American politics as well is actually not between this sort of white working class and metropolitan elites. It's actually between a very sort of small minority of very highly educated, very progressive people and everyone else, including most Black people, most Asian people, most white people, most women, most gays, etc., etc. So I think this is a problem in that if the Labour Party is sort of betting its future, as it seems to be doing, on being able to successfully marshal this coalition of all these different interest groups, well, I think we're going to see, another century of Tory domination, just like we did in the last century.
I mean, how do you think that the kind of middle class left takeover of Labour interacts with Brexit? I mean, do you think it's made Brexit easier in the sense that it's kind of isolated Labour from its traditional base? I mean, do you think it's intensified the process, or do you think it's very much been a much smaller role?
It's very tough to say, because as certain people never tire of pointing out, the main reason Brexit happened was the support of, Tory voting middle class people in the home counties and so on, right? Sure, fine. But at the same time, it also wouldn't have happened on those votes alone, right? You needed plenty of disaffected Labour voters all around the country voting for Brexit for all sorts of different reasons, maybe some to do with immigration, some to do with austerity and so on. So I think one of the reasons this has, the transformation of Labour in recent decades might have contributed to that is the sort of policies of New Labour and Tony Blair, which sort of gave up really on the whole idea of an industrial strategy. Yeah, one of Blair's ideas was, well, we'll tax the southeast and the city of London, and we'll use it to fund Sure Start centres in Middlesbrough and hospitals in Liverpool, and that's great in terms of funding schools and hospitals and Sure Start centres around the country, but ultimately, there was nothing done to actually revive the industries of these places, nothing done to revive, say, shipbuilding or steel factories, steel mills, textile mills, etc. So these places, they've lost their industries, and sure, they received a huge boost of government funding under Tony Blair, but without the sort of local economy and without the sort of pride and psychological benefits that come from having these industries, then I think that itself was a huge reason for Brexit. And again, absolutely, the fact that Labour has been taken over by a certain type of middle class, largely white people, does alienate it from the Labour Party, for many of the people who might have listened to it on Brexit if it was, say, more representative. And I don't just mean the so-called white working class, but plenty of, about 1/3 of Black and Asian people on average voted for Brexit. I think if you had a more diverse range of characters on the left who were saying to people, no, you shouldn't vote for Brexit because of these reasons, then maybe actually a lot of these people wouldn't.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we're currently in the quite extraordinary position of Labour being only the second party in history to be investigated by the EHRC over alleged institutionalised racism. How do you think this plays in with kind of the capture of the party by these new social forces?
I think there's two reasons behind this, really. And for me personally, I disagree with some people on this issue, specifically a lot of Jewish people who put the focus on anti-Semitism and purely on left-wing anti-Semitism. But for me, I think, whilst no doubt there are plenty of left-wing genuine anti-Semites, both in the sort of old school, anti-Semitism of Jews, control the world and are obsessed with money and stuff like that, and also in the more modern anti-Semitic sense of, they're imperialists and all the rest of it. So. But actually, I think a lot of it is a lot of people on the left are they've sleepwalked into anti-Semitism because of their obsessive desire, with many of them, there's an obsessive fixation on Israel-Palestine and their rather patronizing, I would say, belief that it's their role, these white middle-class kids from Britain and America, that it's their role to liberate the people of the West Bank and Gaza, never mind all the other oppressed peoples around the world. For whatever reason, this is the cause that they have chosen, to make their own, So there's two problems going on there. And one of them is a long-term thing to do with the many on the left sort of abandoning the domestic working class in the 60s and thinking these people are beyond redemption, now actually it's the global south. It's these people who are going to be the people we need to support. And also I think is this idea of performative radicalism, of left-wing hobbyism, whereby issues like Palestinian liberation are the perfect issue for people to latch onto for two reasons. So firstly, a traditional criticism of people on the left has been, well, you're not poor. Why do you care so much about the poor, right? Or, well, you're white. Why are you always going on about black people? Well, Palestinian liberation is perfect response to this because, it's not, you can't reasonably expect someone to be Palestinian. In fact, you can't say, well, you're a British person. Why do you care about this? Because you can say, well, why not? And secondly, it has no jeopardy at all for these people. Yeah. Traditionally on the left, right, if you have a well-paid job and you're a supporter of the Labour Party, well, you might have to pay more in taxes if Labour get it. Yeah. Or, I don't know, if you support Labour having, say, trying to advantage traditionally disadvantaged groups and you don't belong to one of them, then again, you'd be disadvantaged by a Labour victory. But with Palestinian liberation, there is no jeopardy at all, right? If you're a white middle-class British man or woman, you need not compromise at all, right? You can support this cause safe in the knowledge that it will not impact your life in any way. So I think they're the two reasons why, we've had this sort of sleepwalking into anti-Semitism as far as I'm concerned, because these people have this sort of patronized, fetishistic idea of Palestinian Muslims as needing their help and needing their support. And of course, not by coincidence, it's very easy for these people to take up this cause because it involves no sense of jeopardy or sacrifice for them.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that the kind of Corbynite phenomenon, obviously, as you say, that there's a lot of kind of middle class hobbyist elements, but there is also a traditional trade unionist element in the sense that obviously like Len McCluskey and Unite, it's almost kind of an alliance between the two. I mean, how do you think that plays off? Do you think one group's using the other, or do you think they've got shared objectives?
It's an ungodly alliance, if you ask me. As I write about in the book, and as many other observers of history of the Labour Party, both historians and political commentators have said, traditionally for the 20th century, it was the unions who kept these people in check. Right?
Yeah.
There's always been this sort of pre-Corbyn Corbynites historically, right, going way back 100 years ago, right to the present day. And actually, they were kept in check by the block votes of the union and the money of the trade unions, the block votes of the trade unions. The unions kept these nutters in check, usually. Now, the unions have been captured by these people, or not necessarily, actually, because people like Len McCluskey, for example, and I would never dare to speak for Len McCluskey, but certainly I do not believe that he has the same priorities as someone like Jeremy Corbyn, much less Seamus Mill. Len McCluskey's priorities are for the ordinary working class people of this country. And his ultimate priorities are things like jobs and austerity and industrial strategy, stuff like this. So he doesn't really care about, all these bizarre esoteric issues that someone like Jeremy Corbyn does. So yeah, definitely, I think there's there's more of a sort of pragmatic alliance here, yeah, rather than genuine ideological kinship. Sure, some people within the unions are genuinely ideologically allied with people like Jeremy Corbyn, not least someone like Andrew Murray, right, who has a finger in, or a foot in both camps, shall we say, right? The traditional union element of the Labour Party, and also the new wave Corbynite, Seamus Mill type tradition. But I think there's a sort of a alliance born out of necessity here, and I'm really not sure who's using who. I hope that the unions are using Corbyn. I hope that they are, and I hope that they are ready to dump him and all who sail with him when the crunch comes. But of course, weirdly, there seems to be a division within the sort of union Corbyn alliance that doesn't cut across the traditional union Corbyn divide over Brexit, for example, right? So we see Len McCluskey, Andrew Murray, Seamus Milne, Carrie Murphy allegedly being very pro-Brexit, right? And many of the other union leaders, and also Corbynites like maybe John McDonnell and people like Paul Mason, who seem to be very anti-Brexit now. And actually, this division doesn't really, it sort of transcends more traditional divisions, in the Labour Party, actually. And it doesn't seem to make much sense to me. So there seems to be a lot of infighting within this Union Corbyn alliance, which isn't splitting over traditional union and what I would call crackpot divisions. So I'm really not sure how it's going to play out. I really hope, as one Corbynite or publicly Corbynite shadow cabinet minister said to me about a year ago, listen, the members are not going to last.
Yeah.
When it comes down to a debate or a dispute between the members and the unions are going to be there long term. The members, when they don't get their way, and they're not going to get their way this time, just like they never have in the past, the members are all going to dissipate and go away. So that's what I'm hoping anyway. I'm hoping in a few years that actually the Labour Party, so many of these cranks who've joined the Labour Party in the past 4 years, will all drift away when they realise that they're not getting the crazy paradise that they've been sold. And hopefully the ballast, the weight of the unions can once again go behind just a sensible mainstream Labour policy focused on socio-economic reform.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the backgrounds of some of the kind of the key Corbynite figures, including Corbyn himself, it is quite astonishing. So, people like Andrew Murray, who in the Communist Party till 2016, Solidarity of North Korea, John McDonnell famously saying that elections aren't working for us, praising the bombs and bullets of the IRA, saying that no Conservative should be allowed to, or Conservative MP should be allowed to travel around the country without harassment. I could go on for hours. Do you think there's a basic question about the fundamental commitment of some key Corbynites to democracy?
I think I'm not really best placed to comment on that. I think the problem is that none of them ever believed that it would ever be in question, right? They never believed that actually there could be a position when they could win power democratically, right? Until probably 10 o'clock on June the 8th, 2 years ago, right, when that exit poll came out. But so many of them, they probably then realized, we could actually, win power democratically, right? So I think that's the problem, John McDonnell, I can't speak about someone like Andrew Murray, who, as far as I'm concerned, to actually be in the Communist Party, or one of the many varieties of the Communist Party this late in the day, I can't really understand someone who might do that. Nor could I understand being someone from Andrew Murray's ridiculous background and having the chutzpah to be a communist. So let's leave that out of it. But someone like John McDonnell can talk and act like an overgrown student union leader for so long. Talking about what should happen to Esther McVeigh and all these things about kneecapping and so on, simply because he had resigned to himself to the idea that he would always be a backbencher for the rest of his political career. Ditto Corbyn, when you go on marches and appear at rallies with all sorts of characters and, present wreaths or be present at the presenting of a wreath to all sorts of characters, because he simply took it as written that he would be a, anonymous backbencher for the rest of his career. So I think this is the issue, actually, that they have always assumed until very recently that what they wanted to do couldn't actually be achieved through parliamentary means or through democratic means. It seems that obviously now, for many of them, they do perhaps believe that the prize is in sight, right? That they could win an election and a majority at an election, and then actually what would happen then, if they do win an election, and how they might interact with certain liberal democratic assumptions, such as the freedom of the press, for example. Who knows, right? But then, of course, we can see that the right is absolutely doing this. You know, both Donald Trump in America and potentially even Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings in the UK with this prorogation, which, you know, the Supreme Court decided was not legitimate. So it's not just the sort of the left right now, you know, which is maybe questioning sort of democratic means and assumptions.
I mean, it's a slightly roundabout question. But why do you think that the kind of the mainstream Labour movement tolerated its far left fringe for so long? I mean, if under Blair or Miliband or Brown, they'd really moved against the far left, I presume they could have kicked them out. So again, over things like sympathy for the IRA, on issues which they're so far away from the British public. Was it that they were just naive about the threat, or was it that they kind of?
I mean, maybe not so much naive. Certainly, they felt that there wasn't a threat, that these people were no threat and weren't important at all, and that they could actually afford to toss them a bone. You know, they could afford to sort of say, "Oh, come on, you know, they're all right. You know, let them hang around there, causing no real trouble. You know, not disrupting us in any meaningful sense." You know, even sort of, you know, Blair making Prescott as deputy prime minister. You know, deputy prime minister is obviously a meaningless role, right? You know, as I'm sure Paul, Nick Clegg and people like that can attest to. You know, it's largely a sort of ornamental role, right? So Blair sort of, oh, you know, we'll give John the deputy prime ministership, and, you know, we'll have a good old laugh and chuckle about Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell and people like that, simply because they, you know, quite related to what I was just saying, actually, in the same way that many people on the left, that the far left of the Labour Party could never truly imagine that they would be this close to power. So too did plenty of people in the centre and on the right of the Labour Party. They just would have thought it was too far fetched. And, you know, in fairness to them, until 2015, it was. You know, I remember when Ed Miliband changed the rules, you know, about electing leaders and allowing registered supporters to pay £3. I thought it was a great idea. You know, completely different to what happened, because I thought it would allow more ordinary people, right? People who didn't care about politics, you know, didn't really care about politics, that it might encourage them to actually get involved and take an interest in politics. And it would be much better because it wouldn't just be the usual political obsessives or people in the unions or fully paid up Labour members. It would allow, you know, your bog standard man or woman on the street to pay £3 and get involved. Of course, the exact opposite happened, right? Nearly everyone who paid £3 were people who definitely were really interested in politics and had been waiting, you know, at the gates almost for this exact sort of opportunity. So it backfired hugely, but hardly anyone saw this coming. So I think not so much naive, because they had no good reason before 2015 really to suspect that this sort of thing might have happened.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think the chances are of the moderates actually managing to recapture the party, perhaps after a coming general election defeat?
I mean, who knows? Who knows a lot? I think, you know, after the events of the past few years, right, from 2015 and the Tory majority through everything else that's happened in Britain and America in the past few years, I'm not making any more predictions about anything ever again. Really. I think
I'll join you.
Exactly. I think a lot of it depends on what will happen when the membership gets a bit of a kick in the teeth and they don't get things their own way. And this could happen either through, say, a defeat in a general election or a Corbyn victory that doesn't actually, you know, bring about, you know, heaven on earth, you know, which does have to make compromises and does have to make decisions which are going to frankly annoy a lot of the membership, as all governments, even a Corbyn-led government, would have to do. But I think one thing is, what will happen to the membership? Will they stick around? Who knows how long for? I think a key thing also is just in terms of what will happen when Corbyn himself goes. Yeah. So I went to Venezuela back in 2008, which was actually a decent time to go. I mean, you know, Caracas was pretty violent, but, you know, people weren't starving to death and you could survive normally outside of the big cities. Okay. And it was so obvious back then. And this is before things had started to go pear-shaped with the economy. But it was so obvious that as soon as Chavez died or resigned or whatever, that it would all be over. Yep, that the entire thing, even though they had instituted so much important structural change in Venezuela, which, believe me, they actually did a lot for people, you know, 10 years ago, the whole thing would fall apart as soon as Chavez died. And I do think now, you know, when I speak to people who are hardcore Corbynites who aren't really into politics, and the way they talk about Jeremy, and, you know, they don't understand, they don't know of any other Labour MPs other than Jeremy. They don't know anything about the history of the Labour Party or what it really is and what it's for. They just know about Jeremy and they love him. They don't know about Rebecca Long Bailey or even John McDonnell. You know, they don't know about potential successes like that. So I do really think that when Corbyn steps down, if, presumably will someday, either after being Prime Minister for a while or after a defeat, or who knows. But when Corbyn steps down, I really think that will be interesting to see what happens, because sure, the left of the Labour Party is really sort of dug in on the NEC and many other important roles within the party. But it seems this reminds me so much of Chavismo in Venezuela, in that it really is so much around the leader. And when Corbyn goes, that's when I think it really will be the chance for the moderates of the Labour Party to take back the party.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one issue that it feels like there's a kind of division between the Corbynites and a large section of what you say is their middle class support base, it's Brexit. I mean, we know there's some kind of surveys of party membership and votes and so on. I mean, do you think that's the issue on which the Corbynites are most vulnerable? And are you almost slightly surprised that Corbyn didn't compromise more and say they would back Remain in any second referendum, which is clearly what the party was angling for?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I would say that issue. And actually, I think before Brexit, I mean, I was writing the book a few years before, well, I think I started just before the referendum, was in the middle of writing it when we had the unexpected result. I rather naively assumed it would all be dealt with and over with by now, actually. So I write in the book how traditionally the issue of immigration, was not only a real difficulty for Labour, because on so many other issues, nobody really cares about things like Israel-Palestine, right? So actually, an elected Labour government, elected on a socio-economic platform, could do all sorts of radical stuff in the Middle East, and most British people wouldn't give a damn, frankly. Same with many other issues. With immigration, they've got to make a choice. You've got to say, okay, make some hard choices. And I actually thought that Brexit would really basically remove this dilemma, because, it happened. The Labour leadership can say we didn't want it to happen. It has happened. We'll have to get on with it. Yeah. And therefore, people would say, okay. And it seemed like this happened in 2017. Yeah. The 2017 manifesto said we will leave the EU and we will end freedom of movement. And it was a brilliant tactic in a way to write this in the manifesto, because people who maybe were, Leave voters, skeptical of immigration, were reassured by that. But many of the younger middle-class Corbynistas thought, oh, come on, Jeremy, he's never met an immigrant he doesn't love. This guy, Mr. Internationalism, okay? He doesn't mean it, yeah? So again, it talks about the importance of Corbyn, right? Because the personage of Corbyn as this genial, George Lansbury, Michael Foot type fella, this arms around the world, CND, anti-apartheid guy, the legend of Corbyn, the myth of Corbyn was so important in reassuring people who were anti-Brexit and who wanted freedom of movement to continue that, okay, Jeremy won't betray us. At the same time, again, both Corbyn's own legacy as a Eurosceptic from the 70s and 80s, and again, the belief within a certain, a strand of the hard left that immigration brings down wages and so on, and undermines the ability of the government to control the economy and so on and all the rest of it. Again, it was so important, right? Because Corbyn himself was able to embody both the sort of, anti-Brexit, anti-immigration tendencies of the left, and also the pro-Brexit, so the pro-Brexit anti-immigration tendencies, and also the anti-Brexit internationalist tendencies as well. So yeah, this is now all fell apart, by the way, since 2017, because it hasn't happened. So when Theresa May couldn't get a deal through, and then actually it seemed like, it was all up for grabs again, right? So this sort of, anti-Brexit movement was rejuvenated within Labour. And clearly most Labour voters and most Labour activists, not to mention MPs, are anti-Brexit. So yeah, it's put Corbyn and the party in this really difficult position. And again, they seem to be just about getting by now, step by step with whatever proclamations they make, whatever the new Brexit policy is from one day to the next. And again, I think the leadership of Corbyn is so important to smoothing it over and keeping the whole show on the road.
Yeah. Well, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.